What the hell was that sound? I guess it stopped.
And then what happened?
Hello everybody and welcome back to yet another episode of The Gloving Paradigm, where I am your host, Peter aka LPD, the cringiest Glover on YouTube.
I don't recall accidentally ingesting poison, and yet here you are trying to make me vomit.
I should probably let that one go now, huh? And just stop saying it. You know what? New year, new me. We're not doing the cringe anymore. At least I hope I'm not doing the cringe anymore. I don't know. No one ever really tells me how I'm doing on my content anymore. Such is the life as a gloving content creator.
Don't worry, buddy. You're doing fine.
So what is it this week that I want to talk about? Well, I haven't touched on this subject matter in a good while, and I think it's time to move forward after such a depressing point in our history. Oh, oops, I just spoiled it right there. Yes, we're going to be talking more about gloving history. Why? Is because we need more people cataloging this stuff. I mean, history is extremely important. How else do we learn if we don't study history? You know, that's the best way humanity has ever learned from their mistakes and shortcomings, and how they developed into a much more evolved, whatever word you want to stick here. I don't really care. But here's the thing about gloving history at this point. After the stigma and the gloving bans happened, which if you don't know what I'm talking about, I did a lovely episode where I kill a lot of brain cells having to talk about that part, because I really hate talking about that part. And the reason why I hate talking about that part, to sum it all up, is that there's no happy ending to that per se. The result of it was bad, regardless of how you feel about it. And I'll even say this right now. It was easily preventable if, choices were put in place. But again, go check out that episode. I went into great detail about it. So there's a lot of points at this point in gloving history that tend to happen that cause this massive explosion. So you have to sit there and wonder, where do you start? What do you start talking about? Because there's so many different aspects about gloving that happen at this point. Okay, we had a rise to power of a certain particular gloving company that really took over 80% of the marketing market. Is that even how you're supposed to word that? Anyways, we also had the first renaissance of gloving, and not the golden age, because every time people call it the golden age of gloving, only refers to it, that's the only time we're ever going to have a peak of that kind of popularity within gloving, which I don't believe that to be the case. I believe there will be another renaissance for gloving to happen again if we foster it. Hint, hint, people. Hint, hint. But lastly, one of the major big points, which I think is a good part to start talking about, because this is one of the major, I guess you can call it a catalyst to it all. Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe this point in time, is a catalyst for gloving's explosion in popularity when it came to gloving itself. And that is IGC and the birth of the competitive scene for gloving. Now, I'm just going to hopefully hear that no one's going to drop their opinions about how they feel about the competitive scene, especially in today's age when it was vastly different back then. The other thing I also want to disclose here is that regardless of how you feel about the competitive scene, especially now, we have to admit that there was some good that came from it. As much as the people who are not huge about the competitive scene, just thinking it's a bunch of ego stroker circle jerking folk that apparently only supports and fosters a superiority complex and massive egos that tend to have a hard time dying, which I will concede to the opinion that actually kind of did happen for some notable people, but again, we're not going to get into that. So, how do I start this? Okay, so we're going to just start where we kind of left off on the last episode of Gloving History. So, yes, we're going to be talking briefly, very briefly, about the gloving ban and the results that came from that. Okay, so yes, IGC 2010 happened. The gloving ban came into effect shortly thereafter because of the media backfire that we got from the public sphere. As much as some people don't believe me, again, there are 2 well-documented cases that explain the reasoning behind a lot of the changes that did not just happen to the gloving world, but to the EDM culture at large altogether. That also probably explains why we are now dealing with that again with the whole Travis Scott situation. Getting off track there. Okay, so at this point in time, when it came to gloving, we were actually pretty much under threat of scrutiny because of a stigma that was birthed from the same culture that we were birthed from, which is the rave scene. And I really don't care what you guys' opinions are about the rave scene. It is what it is, and it has a reputation for a good reason. Okay, it's strange that people want to sit here and like bury their head in the sand to the reality that, yeah, as much as not everybody does it, which is what the stigma tends to label, there's a strong prevalent population within the culture that does fortify the stigma. I guess that's how I'm going to put it. So yes, we were having a massive problem with media reception and public reception of gloving in itself. So yes, as a community, we were essentially being threatened. And so we had to figure out what we can do to keep our community alive. And of course, this is where a lovely company came into play. Now, I know everybody's probably really rolling their eyes, especially old heads like me who have been around as long as I have, who know this history. But to the ones that don't know, I'm not going to go into great detail about this company because they deserve their own episode in their own right, and for good reason. But it needs be remarked that we have to talk about this company if we're going to talk about IGC and the competitive circuit altogether, considering that this was the company that spearheaded this entire thing. So, Amazing Lights. Oh boy, am I going to get a lot of flack for this one. This is going to be terrible. I'm going to get canceled. Okay, so something a lot of newcomers and a lot of younger generations of glovers need to understand is that Amazing Lights was very much a startup company that really built itself from the ground up. Okay, if you guys didn't know, before they even had a store, which yes, Amazing Lights actually had a store, like a place that you can go into and purchase products and things of that nature. I know that shocks a lot of people, but it is true. But Amazing Lights actually started kind of like how Apple and Microsoft started, like in a garage, but except a garage, it was a parking lot outside of an Arby's. I think it was an Arby's. Pretty sure it was an Arby's. Out of somebody's trunk. And then they would practice and have fun, or as they like to call it, the Night Lights series. You know, Thursday Night Lights, Friday Night Lights, Saturday Night Lights. In this parking lot. Listening to music coming out of their cars. Like, I'm not kidding you. Look at this footage. Yeah, that was actually how they used to do it. Before they actually opened up the store. Which, surprisingly enough, that actually opened up at the end of 2010. On December 18th, 2010, Amazing Lights opened their first store, breaking ground to the gloving market, as it were. Now, we were all kind of dealing and communicating with each other on various platforms that wasn't just Facebook. It was, you know, there was other forum sites that I can't even remember half the names anymore, but I do remember one of them being don'tstayin.com or .org. I mean, we're talking about websites I haven't been on in like 10 years now, so you expect this brain to remember them? They'll be listed right here, okay? There's your list of the websites that we used to use before Facebook became a thing, as prominent as it was. So we were all kind of wondering what we needed to do. We all needed a place to go since we couldn't go to festivals and raves anymore because there was an actual crackdown. Like, I remember the security measures put in place, and people who had their gloves found had them taken away before they even entered the venue. And so, of course, we had to stash our gloves and special underwear. I think I'm gonna admit that part.
Well, thank you.
But yes, so instead of doing the criminal thing by sneaking in your gloves like everybody sneaks everything else in, as much as people don't want to admit that, we needed to find a place. So what was generated from that was basically pretty much what Amazing Lights put together. And it wasn't until June 5th of 2011 where we actually got our trailer for this.
Evolution Events, sponsored by Amazing Lights, is proud to present the first official International Gloving Championship on Saturday, June 11, 2011, at the Fairplex Pomona in Southern California. All ages are welcome to attend or compete, featuring musical performances by Tritonal, Matt Zoe, Kid KO, Daniel Candy, Rowdy A, Norin and Rad, Swedish Eagle, Tonic, Dummy, and DJ Philly, featuring the world's top gloving artists.
Every day I'm shuffling.
No, just God, no. So yes, June 11th, we were going to have our very first International Gloving Championship. Now they called it something else at the time, at the very, very beginning, but then they changed it to International Gloving Championship because they wanted to have the bigger picture thing here, which is understandable. Why not try to shoot for the biggest picture you can get when you're trying to save a community that is under threat by public reception and trying to snuff it out as nothing as a weird fad as it was back then. So, yes, IGC was born, and surprisingly enough, I actually had a couple of friends who went to IGC 2011. I unfortunately couldn't do that because the same day that was happening, I was in the military and I was already overseas during that time. Sucks to be me, didn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Whatever. So we actually had a really good turnout for IGC 2011. Surprisingly enough, a lot of people didn't think it was going to probably be like how certain conventions of other fandoms started out, where it was just like maybe 100 people at most. No, we actually had a good, strong turnout of over 300 people. Even if they weren't all competing, there was a very strong turnout. And I mean, did you guys not see that music lineup on that trailer? Like, it was a pretty good lineup at the time, you know. Some of the stuff back then was good, except for the party rock anthem. That just gave me flashbacks. Anyways. So yeah. Here's the funny thing is though, when it came to documenting IGC 2011 in terms of footage and coverage, you know, know, I'm just not going to blame anyone on that. I mean, this was the first attempt at something like this. So, yeah, when you go to watch the footage from back then, you're going to deal with some of the audio is really, really bad. Not only that, it seemed very unstructured in terms of a competition, at least from the appearance of the footage that we have provided. So I don't blame anyone on that. I mean, this was the first attempt at anything, and I mean, if you're expecting something to be pristine from the very beginning of its inception, I'm sorry, that's not how people grow. That's not how things grow to become the way that they are. However, I mean, we had some of the biggest names in gloving at the time attending this, and I mean, how can you say no to this kind of a lineup? We had people like Amor, Mimic, Munch, Sharky, Prestige, Gummy for crying out loud, Dunzo, Stunna, like how do you not know who Stunna is at this point? Anti, freaking J-Bake, and Ice Cream Teddy went to these, alright? So, yeah, we had major tournament, 32 competitors. Of course, this is what really started laying out the standard of what most competitions are going to be like. And so, how did it turn out? How did everything land in the place that it did? Well, good thing to know that Amazing Lights actually made a recap video. So let's go ahead and check it out.
Thanks everyone for coming out to IGC. It was a great event. We had a great turnout. The best thing in my mind was just seeing all the different light show teams competing against each other. I mean, everyone was going at it and having fun. People were competing, but afterwards, everyone was giving high fives, hugs, congratulating them on giving a great show. The competition itself, it did have its hiccups, but we are working on that for the next one. We're actually going to be having monthly boss competitions where basically first, second, third prize winners will be walking away with cash. I'm talking about in the hundreds as well. Other than that, I think the best thing that came out of IGC is now that we have ammunition to show the world that gloving is an art form, and we're growing.
Yeah, that was quite interesting to hear. And yes, of course, we had to listen to Brian Lim talk, but that's just... You can't talk about Amazing Lights in the early days without talking about Brian Lim, okay? I'm just wanting to stress that. The funny thing is, though, is I always like to point this out, that if you guys don't know who Munch is, definitely go check out his stuff. He's really, really cool. But I do want to point this out as a major thing, that the very first International Gloving Championship was won by a conjurer. Okay, so all my conjurers out there, just know that you guys were the first one to take the gold in the first IGC ever. Okay, so to me, that was one major mark on conjuring as a legitimate style within gloving, as opposed to just impacting. So yeah, could have... certainly say this, when it came to IGC 2011, it could have been a lot worse. And in all honesty, if it wasn't for this particular point, we wouldn't have some of the things that we have now. So what is it that IGC gave birth to? Well, we have now the competitive scene, where people will actually show up to compete. Now, please understand, a lot of the competitions that were happening, especially in the early days, were happening mostly in Southern California because that's where a lot of glovers were. It was a very densely populated area in terms of glovers. But this did start spurring other competitions. Most notably, Boss. Which I'm very interested to see how many people actually know what the acronym means for the competition of Boss. So I'm going to ask you here right now, I want you to pause this video, go down into the comment section, and put in your predictions. I want to see how many people can predict what it is that I'm going to be talking about. And then you can start this again. Don't worry, I'll wait. We good? We got our predictions in? Okay. Are you guys ready to hear what the acronym of BOSS stands for? Oh boy, this is definitely going to show the time period. Battle of Supreme Swag. That's what BOSS stands for. It literally stands for that. It definitely shows you the time period when this was incepted. Yeah. Early 2010s was a very strange time for us. Especially even for me, I'll certainly say that. Then again, the early 2010s was my Rumspringa years, so what does that tell you? So yes, we had another competition be birthed from IGC, which is BOSS. Now, what was BOSS supposed to pretty much curate was a monthly competition, more of a local event that people can host to throw gloving competitions around their local area. Now again, this mostly happened in Southern and Northern California because that's where a lot of the densely populated areas in terms of gloving was happening at the time. But this did bring a new wave of glovers, and I will certainly say this also gave birth to other forms of glovers, particularly the bedroom glover. Now, with that one, we'll get its own episode, but to quickly summarize, there was a lot of younger teens that weren't 18 that can't go to events because all the events changed their age range from 16 to 18, so where were they able to practice and do their gloving? In their bedroom. Bedroom glover.
Wow, that was amazing!
But one big thing I need to talk about are the positives and the negatives that came from IGC and BOSS subsequently. So, one major positive that I will say here and now is that with the footage and how we were presenting IGC and BOSS to that extent was we were showing the community gathering together and unifying together to keep themselves alive outside of the rave scene, to show that it isn't just some thing happening in the rave scene. It was actually something that was taking a bigger precedence. It was taking on a new phenomenon. Okay, and that's the biggest takeaway from this whole thing, is that IGC showcased the entire world in the public sphere that this isn't just some little thing that people go to raise and just wiggle their fingers in front of other people. Like, no, this was a legitimate art form that people work on, and that there was a community for it. Just like how poi and hooping and orbiting and all the other flow arts out there and how they got their start, this is how gloving got its start. Now, I'm not saying that the other flow arts got their start in the rave scene. No. Most of it, actually, surprisingly enough, most people don't realize that a lot of the other flow arts actually came from other cultures. You know, you also have circus performances that actually foster the flow art stuff. You know, I mean, for crying out loud, there's Hawaiian tradition dancing that really spawned the whole fire spinning poi flow arts community. Okay, so that's something you definitely need to take account. But this is how we foster ourselves outside of the rave scene to pretty much protect ourselves and be able to grow into a bigger community outside of that. The other major positive, surprisingly enough, as much as people might disagree with me, is that this also helped dispel the negative stigma that we got from the rave scene. You know, the whole transitive property notion of A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. You know, people go to raves, people do drugs, therefore glovers do drugs. And that's all they care about. So, like, it's just, ugh. But yes, this really did help kind of break and dispel that negative stigma. Did it do it very quickly? No, I will certainly say this helped over time. Barring certain videos from certain news outlets that didn't make it much better. We'll get into that. The other thing I will say as well is that it overall was paving the way of how gloving content was going to be made at that time. Okay, especially when it came to showcasing glovers, and this really helped formulate the formula that they were going to put into place. Not only for IGC and BOSS, but for Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night lights that we got a lot of content out of the Amazing Lights during this time period. And I mean, look at this list. Like, there are so many videos that they came out just showcasing different Glovers at the time. Now, here are the negatives that I remember mostly hearing from a lot of people within the community when it came to just the competitive scene being fostered in this fashion. Yes, the competitive scene had some rough beginnings, and it was kind of already starting to polarize itself within the community from the get-go. And this kind of annoys me, because it's either you were a person who did this for the hobby, which apparently made you one of the good guys, but if you looked at this in a competitive sense, this made you a bad guy, because all you want to do was reinforce this toxicity of superiority complex and ego stroking, circle jerking, that people still to this day think the competitive scene is all about this, when it's really not. At least from my experience of watching and consuming this kind of content over the years, many years that I've been doing gloving, it's still strange that people still say this. Now, I will certainly say, yes, I will admit to this here and now, that the early days of Glover's Lounge, which oddly enough was incepted around the same time IGC was incepted. Now, it wasn't incepted by Amazing Lights. It was done by somebody who at the time was sponsored by Amazing Lights, but was not ran by Amazing Lights. Just wanted to point that out. Even though most of the moderators were at least at one point a sponsor of Amazing Lights. That kind of foreboding, isn't it? Anyways, yeah. So I will admit that yes, this did add a level of toxicity within the community, but I will certainly say this here and now, that toxicity was from a very vocal minority. Mostly just because a lot of people in the gloving community weren't in Glover's Lounge at this time. And I'll certainly say that yes, early Glover's Lounge was very much the Wild West of gloving, and there was a lot of trolls happening in that sphere, and I should know, I watched it happen. I also remember when the Purge happened, but that's a later episode. So, yes, this activated a 2-point part of a catalyst. One, that we were actually able to separate ourselves from the raid scene and actually foster ourselves as a separate entity of a community. Therefore, we had this whole expansion and exploration and discovery when it came to gloving, and really laying down the fundamentals and our foundations of what gloving is to be now. But it also fostered what some people would say is just this superiority complex, where it's just like, you're better than this person sucks. And trust me, even Ice Cream Teddy said it himself, that's not what it was about. And still to this day, I don't even think about that. I mean, I don't sit here think that was the same kind of talk when it came to like Magic the Gathering's competitive scene, as much as some people might say that, but those are the same people that never competed in an actual like tournament outside of like their F&M. So, yeah. But yes, at the end of the day, what can we take away from IGC? Well, one, it fostered a new level of understanding when it came to gloving as a whole, which was really laying down the foundations and laying a platform for us as a community to come together and discuss these things. The other thing as well is that it was ammunition for us to show legitimacy of us as a community in gloving as an art form in its own separate thing entirety. So take that as you will, but IGC probably was the saving grace of the gloving community, considering that we were literally under threat by the public sphere because of what happened in EDC 2010 in Los Angeles, which again, go check out that episode if you don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to talk about when it came to IGC. Now, when it comes to the other points in gloving history at this point, this really paved the way for other moments. There, we had the first Renaissance and the rise of the bedroom glover, which we'll get into that one. This is also where Amazing Lights rose to their power and got to their heights of their marketability. Well, just the height of their power and soon thereafter what I'm going to call their fall from grace, because how they are now is completely different than how they were then. As much as some people are going to probably tell me otherwise. And the other thing as well is that this was also the biggest turning point when it came to gloving technology at this time. I mean, we had a huge explosion of different chips coming out before the programmable wave. The wave of programmables came. We had a crap load of different chips. We had different companies at this time. You know, we had Liquid Emotions, OMG Lights, Orbit Light Shows, Candy Creations, Candy Lights, if I remember correct. Yeah, Candy Lights. We had a lot of different sponsors at this time period, so take that as you will. But I think that pretty much covers everything I wanted to talk about when it came to this particular point in gloving history, which was IGC and the birth of the competitive scene, because that is what it was. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I certainly hope you guys enjoyed what I had to say in this episode. If you really want to learn more of what comes out of this, I would definitely suggest checking out Jess's book during the interview the interview portion of his book, where you got a lot of testimonials from different well-known glovers throughout gloving history, because it really kind of gives you a good scope of what was going on in the gloving community for the most part in Southern California. That really does kind of curate some part of the history. Now, hopefully in the future, I might actually get some of these people on here to discuss more of those points in gloving history, because we just need to find a way to actually document a lot of this stuff and catalog this stuff, because it is important for people to understand the roots of gloving and the struggle that gloving had to go through to get to where it is now, and what it's still struggling to deal with to this day. But other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. I really don't think there's much more I need to go into. So if you have any questions that I did not cover in this episode, you have the wonderful places online to hit me up at. All my social media stuff is down there. I even have a new official Instagram account for the Gloving Paradigm, so please go ahead and follow there. I do post stuff there when I can. You also have the comment section down below for a very good reason, because I read those and I do comment when I need to. All of that stuff, except for, a comment like this. Yeah, no, it's not dead. And of course, if you want to help me out with making better content or just getting my content out there more, besides just liking, sharing, subscribing, which is all free, it does not take a single penny from you whatsoever to do that. It helps me out immeasurably. I'm not even kidding. Please consider doing that. But you also have the wonderful opportunity to donate to me at my Ko-Fi. Yes, a little as $1 donation actually goes a long way to helping me out making better content. So yeah, but other than that, once again, thank you guys so much for watching. But I am your host, Peter, aka LPD Dubuque, and I'll see you guys all next week.